Good afternoon. It's been action-packed here over the last few days. We've had the storm Gerrit, which I think was one of the named storms by the UK Met Office. So that was pretty wild. I'll show some footage of that later. Quite a significant loss here, unfortunately. But it could have been worse. No loss to life anyway, so that was good. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the chickens that we're keeping in our polytunnel this winter. So over the last few winters we've had them out in an uncovered enclosure, big space with a really sturdy hand-built timber construction hen house, which we lost last year due to a really significant red mite infestation. Couldn't shift it, and so I panicked and took them straight out of the hen house, dismantled the hen house, and anyway, there's other videos about that. So this is about what would we do this year, this winter. Winters are hard up here, and so it was a case of what would we do, where we could keep them as protected from the weather, dry and safe as possible. And one of the options was to put them into a polytunnel over the winter, just for maybe 5 months, just to keep them, like I say, protected from the weather. So I did a lot of research, but these are my findings on keeping chickens in a polytunnel over winter. So there's pros and cons, like I've said before. Overall, I think it's worked out well, but there are definitely things I would do differently if I'm going to do it again next year. And for anybody that's interested in how this works, I thought it would be quite useful to discuss. So there's 3 main aspects. We have the bedding, the deep litter bedding method, so what goes on the ground of the polytunnel. We have the ventilation, that's a key issue. And the final thing is about the actual structure of the polytunnel, so the integrity of the structure itself. So we're going to go through those, and I'll tell you the mistakes that I've made, what I would do differently, how we set it up, and just show you kind of how it works. Okay, so this is a 6 metre long by 3 metre wide polytunnel, bought from Amazon's finest, I think. It was about £130, so that included the metal frame, obviously, and the cover. That was all. So in order to withstand significant wind that we get straight down the glen here over the loch, and it hits us full in the face here, we decided to put it end on to the loch, so that the end part was the bit that would withstand the majority of the weather. So when the wind's really, really strong, it will impact most likely from that direction. And so it was a little bit easier for us to work out a way to keep the structure as strong as possible, on the basis it came from the back. So obviously when you're hitting 6 metre, this polytunnel, just the cover just acts like a sail, and so that obviously will then impact the strength of the structure itself. So sometimes we do get, we'll cover that later, sometimes you do get weather from there, from either side, in fact from everywhere here, to be honest. So on that basis, that's why it's been positioned in this location. And I'll tell you a wee bit about how the structure went together and what we did to supplement the structure itself. As I say, it wasn't particularly expensive, and therefore always was a bit of a gamble. So we thought we'd try to supplement the structure a wee bit, and so there's some things that we did to do that. I'm in the middle of cleaning out, just so I can explain to you how it's been set up. So that's why this place looks like a mess. So one of the first things we did is we drove in 4 6-foot tree stakes. So these are driven in about 3 foot into the ground and then have been attached to the metal frame. So we have 4 of these You can't see them all now. There's one of them over there, and there's two at the back. Okay, so the next thing we did is we put in, I think it was about 20 reinforced galvanized steel rebar pegs. So they were 6 inches long and then down again, so 6 inches in length in total. So kind of less like a peg, more like a staple, but huge and reinforced. And so they basically grip the bottom part of the metal frame all the way around the tunnel into the ground, 6 inches into the ground. So the tree stakes, the rebar pegs, staples, whatever you want to call them, all the way around. And then so then we had pretty significant strength in the frame. The frame itself, obviously, just like any sort of cheap polytunnel frame, you've got it's just really held in this place here by you know, a nut, and these are not super strong. So I wanted something to stop the thing lifting off the ground, which is the pegs. The tree stakes to give especially the end parts of it a bit of extra strength, you know, in the wind, so there was less give. And then with these here, I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to, in a couple of places where these nuts join in these sections here, I'm going to put down some 2x4s just to give it an extra bit of strength in the high wind, which, like I say, we'll go over later. So that was it. So tree stakes, pegs, and I'm going to do some extra support. I mean, I could have built 2x4s all the way around the frame, but I need it to be fairly temporary. So that was why we decided against that. That could be one of the things that we discuss later as being something I might do next time if we do this again. Okay, so what else we did is the whole entire tunnel is covered in, this is what we call hardware cloth, but I do know the difference obviously between the very tight mesh hardware cloth, which I actually have some out here, so it's the tiny squares. This stuff is loose like chicken wire, flexible like chicken wire, but a lot smaller gauge hole. So it's basically all over the whole entire tunnel, everywhere. So to protect the cover from it, because obviously in high winds you've got a cheap plastic cover rubbing against the chicken wire, we use wool pipe lagging all the way across the arched poles which form the roof sections, if you like. So this pipe lagging is basically, I think it's what plumbers use, but it's attached on the outside to protect the cover from the chicken wire and obviously rubbing against the poles. And it's been attached by cable ties, so with very strong winds it hasn't shifted, so that's good. So pipe lagging to protect the cover from everything else, and that, as I say, goes right across all of these. And then we also have some pipe lagging here just to keep the, this is to keep the chicken wire from rubbing against the main frame. I don't know what you call this, the apex beam maybe? Who knows? That's what we'll call it. So yeah, that's that. And the pipe lagging extends all the way around here because obviously the chicken wire, otherwise we'd be at risk here of piercing the cover. So that's what we did there. Okay, so there goes the dog. So this end part here, this is obviously where the zippy up door is on the cheap polytunnel. So what we have done is created a very basic, because we hadn't done this before, so very basic, kind of suck it and see, just go for it and see what happens kind of frame. So it's a 2x4 timber frame at that end. I will show in a bit more detail. Yeah, so basically, I don't want to show too much detail because it's actually pretty bad. But anyway, this door was actually made from a, it was the cover for a raised bed, so like a hinged cover for a raised bed, but it was the right size. So we basically went with it, and so it's now a door. As you can see, it's not uber well fitting. It gets attached at the bottom by these cable ties at night, and obviously I've got a catch here. We could do more, but I think it's okay. So the frame itself, like I say, very cobbled together. In effect, what we've done is sandwiched the cover between two sets of 2x4. So one set on the inside, one set on the outside. And we've done that all the way along. Along the bottom, we have 2x4s that are again sandwiching the cover. So we've got the 2x4 on the inside meeting, screwed together with the 2x4 on the outside, and that in effect sandwiches the cover. And also around the most vulnerable section, there's a flap that you can see there, and we just have rocks on top of it. Guy ropes, they come with the cover, absolutely pointless. I don't really know what's the point in that. They don't do anything, and certainly if this thing started taking off in the wind, they would not be held back by them. So that's how it works. So that's what we did for the structure. That's the first thing, the most important thing before anything else happened, is making sure that the structure was as sound as it could be, based on the fact that it's pretty windy here. You get all that weather and it's going to hit this tunnel. Okay, so the next important thing is the bedding, the deep litter bedding. Coarse wood shavings that actually are traditionally used for horses' stables. We have straw and we have leaves. So when autumn hit, we started collecting all the leaves and dumping them in here, which gave them something to go through as well, gave them something to scratch through. But what we've got now is a really deep, this is about up at that end. For some reason it always makes its way down there, and I rake it back up and they rake it back down. So this is in some parts about 12 inches deep. It could go deeper, so I'm probably going to put more shavings on top, maybe another bale of straw, let them work through it. So what that essentially does is when they're going to the toilet in here and they're raking through, it's keeping everything as clean as it could be. There's enough depth back here especially, so like I say, rake it forward and keep it even as we can. So that's working out okay. It does sometimes, the smell does build up. Anybody who's kept chickens knows that they don't smell that beautiful. So I think the more shavings that I put on every time I put on a new bale, that certainly suppresses the smell for some time, and then they rake through and it accumulates again. But it's working out pretty well. You don't see chicken mess because they're constantly working through it, and I'm guessing at the end of this, when I take this out of here, it's going to make some good compost materials, I would think. So that's working out good. So deep bedding is the way to go here, I think. Okay, finally, just as important as the structure of the tunnel and the bedding on the ground of the tunnel, I think, is ventilation. Absolutely key. Again, anyone who's had chickens, you know that they have a really high humidity, moisture content in everything they do. It gets moist and damp and is prone to growing mold and spores and all sorts. So in a tunnel that's already going to be very high humidity based on its, that's the function of it, you have to have plenty ventilation. So I've got a roll down panel here, which is just basically a bit of the tunnel cover that came off of the front section when we built the door, and I roll it up and down, but I leave it open if I can. Obviously if there's snow driving and it's driving in that way, then I will roll it down. All the windows are open every day, as long as it's not pouring rain, and obviously the fabric on the windows then will get saturated. So I don't want to cause extra moisture inside by doing that. But if it's dry, if it's windy, all of these windows are open. So there are 6 on either side, and they're open as much as they can be. Even still, it's not enough ventilation, so we still get a build-up of moisture in here, up on the ceiling. We get it in the hen house, which is another reason why I have left it so I can take the roof panels off the hen house, just to give proper airflow. So I'm cleaning them out just now. I've got the roofs off, cleaned it out properly. I'm leaving it to air. All the windows are open just now. Luckily it's not raining. But I'm still getting signs of wee bits of mildew within the hen house. There's just, can't state it enough, ventilation is key. So obviously as soon as the weather starts to get better, the temperature in here is going to go up, and therefore that will not work for the chickens as it gets warmer in here. So it's a winter thing. It really is a winter thing. So the pros and cons, I guess, The pros are definitely, the most important one is the safety and welfare of the chickens. The chickens have far better protection in here than they ever had outside. Sometimes on really windy days they would be hunkered down, and obviously you know, they'd be susceptible to flying debris around the garden. You can't do much about that here in a really high wind area. So in here they are safe and they're protected and they're dry. No more bedraggled chickens going into the hen house at night absolutely drenched and soaked, and then it dips, you know, -6 at night and it's cold. So I think on the basis of their safety and their welfare, this is really working. That's its #1 pro for me. #2 pro is me attending to the chickens in an environment where I'm not going to get absolutely drenched. I have to trek through the snow. I have to batter snow off the roof of the mesh, you know, that used to cover the enclosure. I would be out there with brooms. You know, we'd risk the mesh being breached by the weight of the snow. We had several feet of snow sitting on top of the hen house, and that warped the roof of the hen house eventually. So on balance, the weather protection in here for them and for me is definitely a winner. Okay, so let's talk about the cons of keeping the chickens in the polytunnel over winter. So we've discussed the pros, and in my opinion, they do outweigh the cons. However, there are some, so we should talk about these. The first one for me is the challenge that's presented by keeping chickens healthy in a high humidity environment. So obviously we know that the chickens need a lot of ventilation, and it's keeping that ventilation, making sure that you're intentional about having the windows open when it's windy, keeping them open when it's dry, and just allowing as much airflow throughout that whole setup as possible. Okay, so the second one for me is boredom. Now I have 9 chickens in this 6 metre by 3 metre polytunnel, and they have come from a much bigger enclosure that was out in the open, and they had a much more varied environment to play in, scratch in, you know, their nutrition, they would be picking up bugs and things like that, and that is very much restricted within the polytunnel environment. So we have to be quite intentional about how we keep them from getting bored and pecking on each other. So things like adding scratch into their diet. They've got a dirt box which allows them to dust bathe. And we're just needing to make sure that we give them enough variety to keep the nutrition up, to keep them from getting bored and causing trouble, and basically to keep them healthy for as long as they'll be in the tunnel, which, as I said before, will probably be for around 5 months. Okay, I hope that's been helpful. If anybody is interested in keeping their chickens in a polytunnel, like I said before, there's loads of different resources, loads of videos. I found loads on YouTube that would talk about the different ways to do things just to keep them protected in winter. But so this is how I found it's working pretty well for us. I did just want to show some footage from Storm Gerrit. Like I said at the beginning, the storm has really blown over in the last 24 hours, but prior to that, for the 24 hours before, it was pretty hellish. So I'll just leave you with that, and I hope this has been helpful.